So what do you think was the most interesting thing you learned? I know you're the authority on water, so probably you bring a lot to the aspects. Is there something you take away from our summit?
I don't know. I obviously was responding quite a lot to the thing in my talk this morning. I suppose that, the way I'm not a technologist. I did politics and economics, and that's what interests me about things. And I guess that the political change in this country is something which is going to have an impact on the water sector, and trying to sort of grasp what that might be is quite important. I feel that at the end of the day, water is just fortunately very cut off from Washington, and perhaps this will actually mean that actually water moves further away from Washington, and that people don't even bother to do their fly-ins and so forth. I suppose that some of the things which I've thought about come away with this is are not necessarily things which have been talked about here. I mean, for example, in the session on technology commercialization, nobody mentioned the supply chain, which in this country actually suppresses innovation, in that in the rest of the world we tend to use something called the EPC model, where you have to do a contract which delivers based on delivering water or wastewater, rather than have an engineer who specifies exactly what the system should look like, and then a separate construction person who puts it into place. Which means that getting any change in the way that technology is adopted is incredibly difficult in this country compared to elsewhere in the world. In the last session, one of the questions that came to my mind was also some of the research is quite, one thinks about positive research. I research papers which facilitate new avenues of research, whereas I think that Professor Lienhardt has, is he still here with us? No, he's gone. He Tom published a abstract of one of his papers earlier this year, and it just completely changed my view of what the outlook for desalination is, because essentially he was saying that we're much closer to that limit than you can ever possibly, than we thought we were. That concentration polarization makes it very difficult to improve membrane flux beyond a certain level. And from my point of view, that actually just closes down a whole avenue of making new membranes, which has been a big area of sort of desalination research. And it'd be very interesting to see where he thinks that should go on from there. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm not really responding to what's been talked about. I'm mainly responding to my thoughts on what wasn't talked about. Tom, do you want to?
Yes. First of all, I'm trying to figure out how you would structure 60 courses in entrepreneurship. And I wonder, can you teach people to be entrepreneurs who don't have an innate interest in it to begin with? So that was interesting. But I thought this was a very good session. And I think the interesting thing about it was that you covered all the aspects of water. So often you get technologists talking to each other, or you get policy people or regulators. And I think a wide range of viewpoints, I think a few grenades thrown in every once in a while facilitates some good thought, and that's what universities are known for, after all. And I think the biggest positive thing that I think that I heard was, well, I guess it started kind of late in the whole program, probably, with Dr. Sung talking about the practical aspects, talking about how you want to raise the pH. Do you start with a dry chemical? Can you wet it properly? Or there's a big difference, and you have to have practical experience. Professor Lienhardt in the last panel emphasized that. you got to have some practical experience. You got to get out in the field. You got to talk to practitioners. You can sit in an ivory tower. You can be the smartest guy in the room, but unless you really can identify with the issues and the challenges that the operators are facing, you won't have a complete picture. And so I think that that's very important. And one of the other things, I have followed MIT probably the program more than other programs, because they're one of the few, in fact, maybe the only university that actually subscribes to my publication. Everybody else gets a bootleg copy of it from someone else. But they actually subscribe to it, and I meet students all the time who say, I read it, and I don't know why, but I'm still amazed. But they really, and Prakash, who I've known for a long time, his whole success is predicated on the fact that he got practical experience early on, and he met with the practitioners and listened to them. So I encourage you to do that. More dialogue between people who are not necessarily focused on your specialty. Listen to the other people. Listen to the other experts. And I think that will take you a long way. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to start by thanking the Water Club. As was stated, J-WAFS is a major supporter and sponsor of the Water Club. We worked closely with them in an advisory role on this, and I'd like to congratulate them on having done a wonderful job. It's an excellent set of speakers that they pulled together, and really pleased to be part of this event. So a few observations and comments on the talks that we've heard and conversation over the last day and a half. First, we all have heard, of course, that all politics is local, and I think a lot of the comments over the last day and a half suggest that to a comparable degree, all water is local as well. If you ask people, at least in this country, what are the big water issues, you'll get a very different answer from someone in Southern California than you will from someone in Flint, than you will from someone where I live in a suburb here in Boston, where we currently have a bit of a battle going on with our neighboring town, who happens to have legal water withdrawal rights to a reservoir that is located in our town and owns land around it, and wants to build a new water treatment plant there on that land next to a neighborhood in my town. And to them, the issues are all very local. It's about truck traffic, bringing chemicals in. It's about the fence they want to put around the reservoir. It's about noise from from the water treatment plant that they want to build. So we have really very diverse challenges, and that means that what we need to find are a set of very diverse solutions. We heard from a few speakers yesterday about the importance of implementation. And just a little aside that I've been thinking about in the same context. Anybody from Boston will remember the winter of a couple of years ago where we had some extreme weather, and the MBTA and commuter rail systems, virtually fell down on their faces and failed at their ability to provide the basic service that they're supposed to do. Since then, the Boston Globe has run a number of stories over the past couple of years looking at different aspects of MBTA operations and comparing them to how things are done in their peer major city transit agencies. Anything from clearing snow off the rails to how they actually collect and count money. And in many of these stories, the message conveyed is that they do it better elsewhere, and they know things or have expertise, and it's like, why can't the T here in Boston get its act together when it's not like a challenge that there isn't already a solution out there to. And I think part of that issue relates to the water industry as well. This came up in discussion yesterday also, where it's not an industry that's sort of out there taking risks and exploring new technologies. There's a bunch of people in jobs where, as we heard from George, their main objective is to avoid being noticed, because if they're noticed, it means that something went wrong. And so this question of how can we develop more widespread expertise and leadership and cultivate that through not just the large city agencies like the MWRA and DC Water, who, many of which are doing a good job, but the real small, local, dispersed ones as well. And I think the comment that George made about expertise possibly being considered as a commodity that some of those agencies have in excess and can share with their colleagues in smaller places was an interesting one. So moving on, some comments about research. J-WAFS is, of course, primarily driven by the objective of supporting and motivating more research on water and food issues here at MIT. Water reuse, which we've heard a fair amount about, I think is one of our priority areas. I would suggest that we think of it more broadly, though, because it's not just water reuse. It's also nutrient reuse and energy reuse. We're recycling more than just the water. And so to really think more in terms of the resources in that stream as such and not just as waste. Of course, there are things in the wastewater that are not reusable and are pollutants that we just need to eliminate, but there's a lot in there that can be seen as resources as well. So what that means is research on sensors and new monitoring approaches. That's something that we're very strong in here. New business models and data analytics and IT, all things that we heard about yesterday and this morning. Another, I think, really important area is on pollutants of emerging concern. We didn't hear a whole lot about that, but I think we will a lot going forward. And just something that didn't really come out here, but I was at Stockholm Water Week at the end of the summer. And while I was there, the English TV station in my hotel room was from England, and that week they happened to have passed new legislation addressing these little microplastics that are used in products like shampoo, and they had banned them. And so I think this will be an emerging issue and concern, pollutants of emerging concern, but calls for looking at things, not just how do we get it out of the water once it's in there, but what can we do in terms of policy and innovation to not put this into our wastewater stream in the first place. And finally, just some comments about innovation. We need to think of it not just as technology, but innovation in business models, innovation in risk management models, innovations in partnerships, and like George said, how we can share expertise. And one final thing that I'd like to describe was, again, not from this past day and a half, but just on Wednesday of this week, I was at a meeting with Paul Levy, who was the head of the MWRA through the Boston Harbor cleanup and the construction of the Deer Island treatment plant. And he was talking about how important risk management was for the MWRA as it was entering into contracts with the really, really huge companies that came in to do that work. And he described something that was really interesting. He said that it was really important that the public sector not take on too much of the risk, because then you would end up with very large inefficiencies from the private partner. And it was also important not to shift too much of the risk to the private company that was going to do the work, because then you run the risk of having them, run out of money and not be able to complete the project. So they were looking at developing mechanisms to balance that risk. And one of the things they came up with was to use an escrow process. And when he first said this, I thought escrow, like that's you putting money aside. But this wasn't about money. What they were escrowing was the contractor's technical background documents that they used in preparing their bid. And this was specifically with respect to building a 9-mile tunnel out into the harbor for the outflow from the facility. And they said that that information was put into escrow. It was private information for the company, not disclosed. But in the event that the company said 6 months into the process, oh, we've found such and such underground that we didn't anticipate was there, and so the costs are going to go up by 10%, and that by our contract means it shifts back to the MWRA to cover. They were able to go to those escrow documents and do a recovery, the legal process to discovery, thank you, not recovery, that's the other thing. Discovery process to see, did they actually know about this in advance? Was it indeed something that they just found out about, or could they or should they have known about it beforehand? And so this was a way that they balanced risk. So this kind of innovation in risk management, I think, is just another example. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, a big round of applause for all our speakers.